What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video. We have a few scary Reddit stories today. I hope you guys do enjoy these stories, and let me know what you want to see next. Let me know what you guys want to hear, and yeah, let's get right into it. Story 1, The Nightwalker. I used to work late night shifts at a small convenience store in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and nothing much ever happened. My shift would usually end around midnight, and by then, the streets would be completely deserted. One night after closing up, I decided to walk home instead of taking my car. It was a crisp, clear night, and the 20-minute walk would help me unwind. The first half of the walk was uneventful, just the usual empty streets and the occasional sound of a distant car. But as I turned onto the main road that led to my house, I noticed someone up ahead. A man walking slowly, almost deliberately, was about a block in front of me. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I got closer, I started to feel uneasy. He was wearing a long coat even though it wasn't that cold, and he had a strange, jerky way of moving. It was like he was forcing himself to keep a certain pace. Something about him just seemed off. I decided to cross the street thinking it would put some distance between us, but as soon as I did, the man stopped dead in his tracks. He turned his head slowly to look at me, and even from a distance, I could see his eyes were wide and unblinking. Then, without warning, he started walking again. This time faster and directly towards me. My heart began to race and I quickened my pace. So did he, so every time I sped up, he decided to match my speed. I was starting to panic, and the street, which had seemed so familiar and safe, now felt like it was a trap. I glanced around for anything that could help me, but the road was completely empty. As I came close to a corner, I made a split-second decision and I darted right into an alleyway. It was a shortcut I sometimes took, but it was narrow and dark and wasn't a good idea. I could hear the man's footsteps getting louder behind me, and I knew I couldn't outrun him for much longer. Just as I was about to reach the end of the alley, I heard a loud crash behind me. I turned around expecting the worst, but the man wasn't there. Instead, I saw a large metal garbage bin had fallen over, blocking the alleyway. It was strange because I hadn't seen it there before, and I hadn't heard anyone move it. I sprinted the rest of the way home, not daring to look back. When I finally made it to my house, I locked the door and peered out the window. The street was empty again, as if nothing ever happened. I never saw that man again, but the memory of his cold, unblinking eyes still haunts me. I don't know who or what he was, but I've never walked home alone since that night. Story 2, The Mysterious Hitchhiker. It was early autumn, and I was driving back home after visiting my parents in the countryside. The trip took about 3 hours, most of it through winding, tree-lined roads with little traffic. As the sun began to set, I realized I hadn't seen another car for about almost an hour. It was just me and the road, surrounded by dense forest on both sides. The fading light cast long shadows across the road, and the trees seemed to close in around me, creating a tunnel of darkness that was only pierced by my headlights. About halfway through the drive, I noticed a figure standing on the side of the road ahead. As I got closer, I saw it was a woman, her clothes disheveled with long, messy hair hanging in front of her face. She was holding out her thumb, trying to hitch a ride. Normally I wouldn't stop for hitchhikers, especially on a deserted road like this, but something about her seemed desperate. Maybe it was the way she looked over her shoulder nervously like she was being followed, or the way that she clutched a small bag to her chest as if it was her lifeline. Against my better judgment, I pulled over and I rolled down the window. She approached the car slowly, and as she got closer, I could see she was trembling, her eyes wide and filled with fear. "Are you okay?" I asked, glancing around to see if anyone else was nearby, but we were alone, just me and her, and the endless stretch of road disappearing into the trees. She nodded but didn't say anything. There was something off about her, something I quite couldn't put my finger on. But before I could change my mind, she opened the passenger door and got in, moving with a strange combination of urgency and hesitation, like she wasn't sure if she should be getting into the car at all. The car was filled up with an overwhelming scent of damp earth and something else I couldn't identify, something sharp and metallic. I tried to make small talk, asking where she was headed, but she remained silent, staring straight ahead. Her eyes were wide, and she kept clutching the small bag to her chest as if it contained something valuable or dangerous. I couldn't help but glance at it, wondering what was inside, but I didn't dare to ask. We drove in silence for a few miles before she finally spoke. "Don't stop," she whispered, her voice shaky and barely audible over the sound of the engine. "No matter what you see, don't stop." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She just kept staring straight ahead, her grip on the bag tightening, her breathing became more erratic. I glanced in the rearview mirror and my heart skipped a beat. A dark figure was standing in the middle of the road behind us watching the car. I hadn't seen anyone when I picked her up, and we hadn't passed anyone since. But there he was, a tall man in a long coat, his face obscured by shadows. His presence felt wrong, like he didn't belong there, like he was something out of a nightmare. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that that figure was getting closer, even though we were moving at a good speed. The woman beside me began to breathe heavily, her panic contagious. I could feel it seeping into my bones, making me grip the wheels so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Whatever you do, don't stop," she repeated, more forcefully this time, her voice trembling with fear now. Suddenly the car's engine began to sputter. I glanced at the dashboard, everything seemed fine, but the car was slowing down. I pressed the accelerator, but it didn't respond. We were losing speed fast, and the figure now was in full view behind us, getting closer with each passing second. I could see his face now, pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed too large for his skull, staring right at me, unblinking. The woman started crying, her hands shaking as she clutched the bag. "Please," she begged, "just keep driving, don't let him catch us." I was about to respond when the engine roared back to life and the car launched forward. I floored the gas pedal and we sped down the road, leaving the figure behind. I didn't look back again until we reached the next town, my heart racing, my hands shaking on the wheel. When we finally arrived, I pulled over at a gas station and the woman quickly got out without saying a word. She walked away, just disappearing into the night, her silhouette swallowed by the shadows. I wanted to follow her to ask her what had just happened, but something told me to just leave it alone. There was a finality to the way she left, like she had escaped something terrible and didn't want to be reminded of it. To this day, I don't know who that woman was or what she was running from, but I often wonder what would have happened if the car hadn't started again and that dark figure had caught up with us. Sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, I catch a glimpse of a shadow in my rearview mirror, and I can't help but feel that guy might be out there still, waiting for another chance or waiting for that girl to, cross his path again. Story 3. The Unexpected Guest. I had just moved into a new apartment, a small but cozy place in an old building downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was close to work and the rent was affordable. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, or so the landlord said, which was why the place was available so suddenly. There was an air of mystery about the apartment, the kind of place with creaky floors and old faded wallpaper that hinted at a long history, much of it forgotten. On my first night there, I was unpacking when I heard a knock at the door. It was late, around 11 p.m, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I figured it might be one of the neighbors welcoming me, so I went to answer it. The building was quiet, almost unnervingly so, with only the faint hum of the old radiators to break the silence. When I opened the door, there was a man standing there. He was in his late 40s with graying hair and a slightly disheveled appearance. He smiled awkwardly, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy, a kind of intensity that didn't match his polite demeanor. "Hi," he said. "I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I used to live here. I left something behind, and I was wondering if I could come in and grab it." I was caught off guard by the request. The landlord hadn't mentioned anything about the previous tenant needing to retrieve something. The man seemed genuine, his expression almost pleading, but something about the situation still just didn't sit right with me. Still though, I didn't want to be rude, so I hesitated before stepping aside. "What did you leave behind?" I asked as he stepped into the apartment, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for something specific. He looked around, his eyes darting from the room to room with nervous energy. "It's personal. It's in the bedroom," he said, already heading down the hallway before I could say anything else. I followed him, starting to feel a bit more uncomfortable. Something about the way he was acting didn't sit right with me. He moved with a sense of urgency, but there was also hesitation in his steps, like he wasn't sure if he wanted to find whatever it was that he was looking for. But before I could ask him to leave, he opened up the bedroom door and he walked in. I stood in the doorway watching as he began to search the room. He moved methodically, opening drawers, checking under the bed, even looking behind the curtains. But he didn't seem to find what he was looking for. The more he searched, the more frantic he became, his movements growing erratic as he overturned items, pulls clothes out of the closet, and even ripped the sheets off of my bed. After a few minutes, he stopped and turned to me. His face was pale and drawn. "It's not here," he said, almost to himself, barely even whispering it. "They must have taken it." "Who?" I asked, confused and growing more anxious by the second. "What are you looking for?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked past me, heading back towards the front door with a strange, defeated air about him. I followed him, my unease growing with every step. The apartment felt colder now, and the shadows seemed to have lengthened, creeping across the walls like they were alive. When we reached the door, he turned to me and said, "If they come looking for it, don't let them in." His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I saw something there. Fear, desperation, maybe even a little bit of regret. Before I could respond, he left, closing the door behind him with the finality that made my heart skip a beat. I stood there for a few minutes trying to make sense of what had just happened. The whole encounter was so strange, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong here. The apartment, which had felt like a fresh start just hours before, now felt tainted by whatever had just transpired. Later that night, as I was laying in bed trying to calm my racing thoughts, I heard a noise outside my window. It was a soft tapping, like someone was gently knocking on the glass. I froze, my heart absolutely racing. I lived on the 3rd floor, and there was no balcony outside my window. The thought of someone or something being out there was pretty terrifying. The tapping continued, getting louder and more insistent. I pulled the covers over my head trying to block it out, but it only seemed to grow louder, more demanding. It was as if whoever or whatever was outside knew I was there, hiding, and wouldn't stop until I acknowledged it. Finally, after what felt like hours, it stopped, leaving me in a tense, suffocating silence. The next morning, I checked the window, but there was no sign of anyone being there. No fingerprints, no marks on the glass, nothing. I asked the landlord about the previous tenant, but all he would say was that the man had left suddenly, without much explanation, and that I was lucky to have found such a good deal on the apartment. His reluctance to speak any further only deepened my sense of unease. I never saw the man again, and no one ever came looking for whatever he was that he left behind. But every now and then, I still hear that soft tapping on the window at night, and I wonder if I made a mistake by letting him back in. I wonder if whoever he was afraid of whoever they were, and they might have found their way to me. The thought keeps me up at night, and I've taken to sleeping with the lights on, hoping it'll keep the shadows out and whatever might be hiding in them. The unsettling encounter at my door. This happened about 3 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time, and it creeps me out. I was 20 years old at the time and had just moved into a new apartment on the 1st floor of a building. It was late one night and my roommate was out when somebody knocked on the door. This was not uncommon as we were in college and my roommate had friends that would come to try and hang out at all hours of the day. I had figured it was one of his friends, so I get up and check the peephole. Staring right back at me through the peephole is an eyeball pressed against it. Again, this is also something that one of our friends might do to be funny. I chuckled and opened the door, surprised to see a guy in his mid-20s that I didn't recognize. He was strange, to say the least. He was very hyper and immediately launched into a door-to-door salesman type pitch. I can't remember exactly what he was even selling, but it was something about the local university, which I also attended at the time. The whole time he was talking, he kept looking past me into the apartment. He was fidgeting and even standing on his tiptoes to see inside. Still, I just thought that this guy was weird and nervous and might have not all been there. I politely declined to buy anything from him, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. I finally had to be pretty stern in telling him that I wasn't interested. He finally accepted defeat, and as I was closing the door, he put his hand out and stopped the door from closing. Before I can be like, yo, what the heck? He smiles at me and said, I like Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64 too. Now me and my roommate had been staying up late into the night playing Mario Kart 64 in my bedroom for the past several days before that. But there was nothing that he could see from the apartment entrance that had anything to do with Mario Kart. I was taken back and trying to add things up in my head, and I confusingly asked, how do you know I play Mario Kart? He then got super nervous and said, oh, I just thought somebody or anyone with a couch like that would be into Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64 because, you know, it's like a retro game and I guess that's a retro couch. What the hell is that explanation? Then he was like, okay, bye, and literally scurried away. I shut the door and locked it. I started to put the pieces together on how he could have known that, because obviously it wasn't because of my grandma's old couch. Remember, it's a first floor apartment that is backed up to the woods. My roommate got home shortly after that, and I immediately tell him about the encounter. He was freaked out too, and we started investigating. At first it seemed as if there was no way to even see inside my bedroom. My blinds were always down. We went outside and tested it and found that the only way to see inside would have been if you had your face right up against the window. And even though you kind of had to crouch and close one eye to get a glimpse of the inside. A couple more creepy details. My window was over a balcony, and the Nintendo 64 console itself was stored inside the TV stand and was not visible. You'd only be able to see it while we were actively playing, which we never did until we were a little stoned and it was like 2 AM. So basically this creep had been jumping on the railing to our balcony, pressing his face against my window, and watching us play Mario Kart in the middle of the night. Never saw the guy again, but needless to say, I was pretty paranoid for a while after that. I constantly checked my windows and woke up in the middle of the night paranoid that he was standing there just a couple feet away. Just a very unsettling encounter. I'm glad that nothing more ever came of it and that I never saw him again, but I've always wondered what his motives might have been. That is the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys did enjoy these 4 stories. Let me know if you guys want me to get them a little longer, and let me know if you guys like these Reddit style videos. I really do appreciate the support, and I would love if you dropped a subscribe, a thumbs up, whatever. Anything helps, guys. So see you in the next one. Peace.